All right, a couple of quick announcements before we jump into the scriptures today. Let's see. Camp. Please be praying for our kids as they go to camp. Offering. Today's ushers come forward, please, to receive today's tithes and offerings. Again, thank you for your generous hearts. And again, some of these monies is going to go to some of the help that we can lend to refugees. So thank you again for your hearts so that we can serve this community. Kids camp, junior high camp, senior high camp, please pray for our students as they go to camp. It's one of the most impacting things that they can do all year. And so to unplug, to focus on God and Christ at this camp, it's a great opportunity for their faith to increase and grow. So please be praying for them. Let's see. Our young adult Bible study is going to pause until the fall. Our leader of that is getting married, and so he's going to be focusing on doing some pre-marriage counseling and working full-time. So we're going to pause on that until the fall. And then there was one other thing. I think I already mentioned it. It was the barbecue after church. If you are just hearing about this, we're not going to start probably the cooking or anything until around 11:30, 11:40. Don't feel like you have to bring anything, but just come and connect with people. Get to know people. One of the best things about planning a church is getting to have a lot of the people that you know and see in the same room every single week. And there's great people in this church, and so get to know them. All right. For the last couple of weeks, here are my announcements right here. Yep, I hit them all. Good. Okay. The last couple of weeks, we've been talking about heroes in the faith, and as my wife Becca so eloquently put it, there are fathers that believe that we can do great things. Fathers in the faith, mentors in the faith. But I want to remind you that as we every single week are looking at a story, not just an individual story, but a story, a narrative, a meta-narrative of the whole Bible. Hopefully we understand that the Bible is not just one book, disconnected stories of how we can live a better life. The Bible actually tells one single story that tells what is wrong with the human race and the world and how God has allowed it to be made right. And then how history is going to be turned out in the end. Today we're going to look at a man in the faith, a hero in this overarching story. His name's Abram, a.k.a. Abraham, one of the heroes in the faith. Now, some of you who have grown up in the church, you know this story or this song. Father Abraham has many sons, and many sons has... Okay. You are one of them. Or so am I, or the other way around. So let's just praise the Lord. Okay, so we're one of Abraham's sons. This is our father in the faith. And we learn of Abraham's heroism in Genesis chapter 15. So if you have your Bibles, you can turn there, and I'll have it up on the screen. And we learn that Abraham has this conversation with God. And God promises him something in this section. Genesis 15, 4 through 6. And behold, the word of the Lord came to him. This man shall be your heir. Your very own son shall be your heir. And he brought him outside and said, look toward heaven, the number of stars, if you are able to number them. Then he said to them, so shall your offspring be. And he believed. Abraham believed the Lord, and he counted it to him as righteousness. Have you ever heard God's audible voice? You don't have to raise your hands, or maybe you thought you heard God's audible voice. When I was playing baseball overseas in Japan, in a different country, I was a foreigner. I had a lot of teammates that liked to poke fun at me because of my faith. I wouldn't look at certain magazines, or I wouldn't enter into certain conversations because they just weren't edifying. They weren't righteous. And so this particular day, we were waiting around to get on a bus, and one of my teammates got a hold of an intercom in this little area. And they said,
"Bobby, this is the Lord."
And I'm not kidding, because I was praying or doing something that was trying to listen to God, and it freaked me out. I mean, it got my attention. And they all started laughing and thinking that was really, really funny. Now, I don't know if Abraham heard God's voice this way, but he received a word from the Lord. And it must have been convincing with what happened afterwards. He wasn't reading Genesis or anything, but God revealed something to him. Not only did God speak to Abraham, but Abraham listened. And this is why he is mentioned in the Hall of Faith in Hebrews. Hebrews chapter 11, we read in verse 8 about Abraham. By faith, Abraham obeyed when he was called to go to a place that he was to receive as an inheritance. And he went out not knowing where he was going. By faith, he went to live in the land of promise, as in a foreign land, living in tents with Isaac and Jacob, heirs with him of the same promise. For he was looking forward to the city that had foundations, whose designer and builder was God. It was by faith that Abraham made it into this chapter. It was by faith. Thank you, Jerry. It must have sounded like I had cotton mouth or something. Have you ever had someone call you and you didn't respond? Guys tend to call this selective hearing. I'm not sure what kids call it. Maybe they might call it, well, I know I would call it, if a kid doesn't respond to me, stubborn. Once in a while, my kids, they don't listen to me, and it frustrates me. I'm sure some of you parents can relate. Maybe not. About 4 years ago, or 5 years ago, I started taking my children one at a time down to Lewiston to go fishing. And it was their own trip. And the reason that I took them on this trip was to ask them how I could be a better father. And so, we'd spend some time at the Flying J. There's a little gas station where they get a bunch of things. We'd probably spend less time fishing and more time, getting the little snacks and stuff. But the way that God worked it out is I would have individual, intentional moments with my children. And I asked all of them this particular fall, I said, how can I be a better dad? Because sometimes our perspective is, we're the best dad in the world. Of course, duh. And their perspective might be just a little different. And an interesting thing I found in asking this question of my children specifically. They said, Dad, when you talk to us, you yell at us. So now my 3-year-old came up with this, Samuel, Olivia, who was 5 at the time, and Caleb, who was 7. Now I know that they didn't all conspire because they didn't know the question I was going to ask them. I know that they didn't go and ask their mom to say, hey, what do you think we should tell Dad? They all came up with that on their own. Now my point is, in telling you this, is I can get my children to obey me. I'm a very loud, sometimes I've been told an intimidating person. I can stare into your soul. But would I rather have them choose to obey me? Or would I want to make them obey to choose. Well, God and Abraham's communication was different. See, God wasn't yelling at Abraham. And Abraham wasn't being stubborn. That might be the story of Jonah. It might be the story for you and I. But it wasn't for Abraham. Abraham was called to go, and he went. Hard. I like to know the details. We're going to get to that in a little while. No details. Go to a land where you don't know. Okay? God called Abraham in verse 8 of Hebrews 11 to leave Haran and go to Canaan, the land of promise, the land that was promised to him. By faith, he went. Back to Genesis 12, 1 through 3. Now the Lord said to Abraham, "Go from your country and your kindred and your father's house to a land that I will show you. And I will make of you a great nation, and I will bless you and make your name great, so that you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and him who dishonors you I will curse. In you all the families of the earth shall be blessed." So this brings us to point 1 on our outline today. If you're taking notes, God is calling you. God is calling you. Hebrews 11:8. By faith, Abraham obeyed when he was called to go out to a place that he was to receive as an inheritance. He was called. God called Abraham to Canaan on purpose, the land of promise. He called him on purpose to receive an inheritance. Now, although my story and your story probably won't look exactly like Abraham's, we can know, because the character of God is unchanging, that God is calling us to something. Now you may say here, "Come on, Bobby. This is my first time coming. Maybe this is my 6th or 7th. Just leave me alone. I'm comfortable. I'm stretched to the max right now. I don't have any more time to give. I don't have any more resources to give. Hey, I'm good right now." Maybe he's not asking you physically to go somewhere, but maybe God is calling you spiritually. Where does he want you to grow? Where does he want you to trust him more? Where does he want you to learn about him more? Well, the story of Abraham is a story of someone leaving a place physically. It is so much more. It's so much more. Abraham was leaving behind what? He was leaving behind his family. I've talked with people this morning that said they love to be around family. It was so refreshing. He was to leave his culture, everything that he knew, everything that was familiar. He was to leave a way of life. God had a new direction for him, but it was completely new to Abraham. He'd come from a polytheistic culture, but was choosing to listen to God, that he would come to believe and to trust and to truly believe that he was the only God. God's call on your life and mine is no different. Maybe we don't have to leave our homes, but we're called out of the ways of this world that so entice us to just go along with the flow. We're called to live differently, unlike the culture around us, giving up world's many gods and serving the one true God. But while the call may be clear to you and to I, just like it was to Abraham, where it leads is definitely not clear all the time. It's not clear. When God called me to follow him and I accepted Jesus, I didn't know exactly what I was doing. I mean, I understood my choice that I was making, but I didn't understand what was going to happen next. I didn't understand what the day in, day out, putting my life in Jesus' hand was going to look like. I didn't. Neither did you. My journey began with a clear call. God was calling me to something different. But I was headed into an unfamiliar land. An unfamiliar territory. This is why it's called faith. And it's tough. It's difficult. It's never deemed as easy. When you find out where you are called, you want to get to that something and know what you're there for. You want to know what God wants to use you there for. And you may have an idea, but if you're like me, you want to have the details. What exactly do you want me to do? Who do you want me exactly to talk to? What do you want me to say to them? There are times in my life where I get to a point where I just kind of need to get away. You know what I'm saying? I mean, like you push and push and push and push, and then you get to the point where you're like, I got to have time out. I need to exit Spokane for a couple of days. I love Spokane, but I remember one such time in my life. This was BC, before kids, before children, I guess. Kids, children. Beck and I were just kind of burning at both ends, burning the candle at both ends, and inevitably we were not going to have a candle. And so we had to get out. And I'm from Montana, and I love Montana. I love, once you cross over into Montana, it's just like decompression starts to happen. And so this particular weekend, Becca said, yep, we need to get out of town. And I said, all right, let's just go to Montana. She's like, okay, details. Hey, I grew up in Montana. I know where we're going to camp. There's tons of places. We can go. So we just started driving. She followed me. Great wife. And we drove to a couple of different places. We found this one place that seemed like it was a good place. And we got out our mats and our sleeping bags, and it was comfortable. And we actually even slept really well. I mean, it was like, you're picturing, like when you wake up in the morning, the scenic mountains. We're right on the Clark Fork River, beautiful. I might get up early and go and stretch a line. And, I mean, it was just, that picture, right? And about 6:15, we wake up to, we think we're going to get run over by a train. Is basically what it is. And it was anything but scenic. Needless to say, Becca has taken care of our campsite planning since then. It would have been nice to have known some of the details, like we were 20 feet away from a railroad. But in Abraham's case, it tells us that he went out not knowing where he was going. He went out not knowing where he was going. He just left. No plans, no iPhone, no GPS, no maps, no direction, nothing. But the charge to go to a land that God will show him and his wife. Go. Can't you imagine Sarah? Put yourself in Sarah's shoes. Hey, no. Where are we going? What should we pack? Will it be cold where we're going? Should I pack snacks? What about emails? Who should we have those forwarded to? They didn't have emails. What about our internet access? What about our forwarding address? What should we bring? Abraham says, I know that we're not supposed to stay here. I know that God is calling us to the land of promise. I know that we're supposed to go. That's all I know. And I want to be obedient to that. Genesis 12:1. Now the Lord said to Abram, Go from your country and your kindred and your father's house to a land that I will show you. Abraham knew that he was called, and he believed that God was in control. By faith, Abraham believed that God knew where he was going. And this is true for you and I as well. God knows where he is taking us. God knows where he's calling us. God knows. And it's best. Even if we don't have all the details, it's best. This leads us to number 2 on our outline. God knows where he's taking you. God knows where he is taking you. Where was he taking Abraham? The land of promise. Hebrews 11:9. By faith, he, Abraham, went to live in the land of promise, as in a foreign land, living in tents with Isaac and Jacob, heirs with him of the same promise. God said, leave. Leave everything that is familiar, everything that you're accustomed to, everything that you might not need my help in order for me to show you a new land, the land that I have prepared for you, the land of promise. Think about preparations, in knowing where you're going, in God preparing this land of promise. Think about it. Think about how much we depend on preparation. I love to be prepared, don't you? Don't you feel awkward and insufficient when you're unprepared? One of the things that stuck with me from my junior college coach, he said there's no better feeling than being prepared. True. Think about when you were a baby, or think about it, you can't, know. When you were taken out of your mom, there was a place that was prepared for you. A place to nourish you. A place to care for you. When you turned about 5 and you started going to school, think about your teacher that had a room that was perfect, that was going to engage your learning targets. Had a perfect reading corner. And a perfect art corner. Maybe some blocks and some educational toys. When you were 14 and you started going to high school, maybe not quite as nice as kindergarten, but your teachers definitely had plans for you. Plans for you to learn, plans for you to grow. They were preparing you. When you graduated from college, think about that. You're looking for a job and you got a job, or maybe you didn't get a job. And then you got married and had 2 kids, maybe 3, maybe 4, maybe 5. And while each of these were transitions, you had some type of plan for the next stage of your life. And if you didn't prepare, chances are it got tough. Because as humans, we like having plans. And we like when we have a place that is prepared for us. And it's really good to have a plan. It's really good to have a plan. But my encouragement to you is to write that plan in pencil, because God has a funny way of erasing those plans and just tweaking them a little bit. But it's better. It's always the best because he has the best in mind for his children. Don't you? Have you ever lived in a foreign land before? Any amount of time? Very difficult. Like Brent shared, don't know the language. I lived in Japan for about a month. I found out how to say, where's the bathroom? Where can I get some food? But it was difficult. I lost 15 pounds. I didn't like sushi. I love sushi now. But that's nothing compared to some of our guests that are here today, who have come from another country. They speak different languages. They live in a completely different setting. Kind of like Abraham's call. And they're here by faith. Opportunity and faith. It was by faith that Abraham and his wife Sarah left their homes and became nomads and lived in a land not wholly theirs. And stayed and endured even to their death. You know, sometimes growing in our faith is not so much about making more promises to God, but believing more of the promises that God has had for us. The land that Abraham went to was what became the promised land to the entire nation of Israel, the nation that came from Abraham's offspring. If you read the entire story of Abraham and follow it through the entire Bible, you will see that from his son Isaac came Jacob. And from Jacob came the 12 sons, who each became one of the heads of the 12 tribes of Israel. One of those sons was Judah, and is an ancestor of the king named David. And this king had children, who had children, who had children, until one day one of these children, a young girl named Mary, became pregnant with a baby who she would name Jesus. You see, Abraham and Sarah couldn't see the future. They could only trust that God had called them and that He knew where it was that they were going and what for. Does God always give us the details? Man, if He gives you the details, I want to hang around you more. In fact, most of the time He doesn't, right? If He did, it wouldn't be faith. Well, this step of faith taken by Abraham and Sarah can seem big. The steps that God asks us to take, you and I, can be overwhelming. Most of them have to do with our fear of the here and now. The great thing about it is that God has our lives in His hands. He knows where we will end up on this earth. But more importantly, He knows where we will end up for good. This isn't the last train stop. By faith, we receive God's prepared place because it is eternal. And that's number 3 on your outline. His plans are eternal. His plans are eternal. Hebrews chapter 11, verse 10. It says, "For he," Abraham, "was looking forward to the city that has foundations, whose designer and builder is God." Abraham was looking ahead to the designer and builder of something that wasn't in this world. One of the greatest things that Abraham can teach us is perspective. Abraham had it right. He was not concerned with where he would sleep, where he would eat, if everything was comfortable. No, he knew that God would take care of him and it would be best. And in the end, he would end up with God in heaven. Sometimes as American Christians, we have a hard time thinking of heaven because our lives here on this earth are pretty good, right? We've got AC at home, not in here. We've got amenities, we've got food. A lot of our wants are taken care of. We get to play golf. We've got a job. It's not too bad. But living in this comfort can make us lose sight of the fact that there is much more to this life. Much more to this life than the comforts that we get to experience. Abraham knew this. And so have many Christians throughout history. Our heroes in the faith. In the middle of the 3rd century, Christianity was not an acceptable thing to place one's trust or faith in if you were a citizen or a subject of the Roman Empire. Within the bounds of the Pax Romana, a period of relative peace, there was no room for those who insisted, "Blessed are the peacemakers." No room. Yet things had changed when a plague began sweeping through the Roman Empire. And it not only claimed Romans who were not Christians, but it also claimed Christians. So Christians and non-Christians alike. Alexandria was a particular place hit hard by the plague. Over 5,000 people ended up dying daily to this plague. Soon people began abandoning those who showed any trace or a symptom of the disease, and they flee to the countryside that they might escape this plague, leaving loved ones behind. And this disease spread quickly. Many fled, going into so far as abandoning their children, their parents, their spouses, just in the streets, so that they could be away from this infection. Having escaped, they did their best to keep watch on the city so that the infection might die out with its victims and then they might return. But the Christians did exactly opposite of this. Once their persecutors had fled in the wake of the plague, the Christians of Alexandria began coming out of hiding to take care of these people, these dying people. Why would they do such a thing? They knew that it would likely cost them their lives, yet they felt compelled to care for the abandoned and the dying because of their faith. Their faith. Why would they do such a thing? Since the city had been abandoned by all those who could afford to escape, there was little persecution of the Christians, even though they had come out of hiding. They met in public to worship and proclaim their faith, and were welcomed by those who remained because they offered hope and healing when everyone else had run out of their lives. Most of those who remained, they did die. And they were buried with the ones that were cared for. They died. But they died knowing that there was more than just this life. Don't you want to have faith like that? I do. To live as though there is something more than just here and now. And we should. We should, because we share the same faith as Abraham. We share the same faith as these people in Alexandria. If you're a Christian, you know that life is not all there is here on this earth. It's temporary. And you know that God is preparing something great, something better that you will someday get to see. And this we're reminded in the Hall of Faith text in Hebrews 11. Continuing in verse 13 through 16. All of these people that we mentioned, they died. These all died in faith, not having received the things promised, but having seen them and greeted them from afar, and having acknowledged that they were strangers and exiles on the earth. For the people who speak thus make it clear that they are seeking a homeland, heaven. If they had been thinking of that land from which they had gone out, they would have had opportunity to return. But as it is, they desire a better country, that is, a heavenly one. Therefore, God has not ashamed to be called their God, for he has prepared for them a city. Abraham, Abel, Enoch, Sarah all died before completely seeing what God had promised. They all lived as strangers, as exiles on earth, as foreigners, as not belonging. They lived in a world, but not of the world. They lived in the world, but not of the world. Their faith separated them. as it ought to us. And for good reason. It was because God has prepared a place for them. And as God has prepared a place for us, as we are children of the same Father. Remember? Father Abraham, many sons. Many sons as Father Abraham. That's us. That's us. There's a place prepared for you and I. So, how about you and I? Are you living as a stranger of the world? Or are you being a chameleon? Do you have hope in the midst of difficult situations? Do you put yourself on the line knowing that God has your life in His hands, that God has your back? Or are you quiet? Have you worked in a place for 30 years, and do people even know the most important relationship in your life is Christ? Do they know? Or do you just not want to ruffle? These heroes of the faith, they challenge you and I to step out, to answer the call to live the lives that God has called us to live without fear. Because as Christians, we too believe in the one true God. God knows what we're facing. He's there with us. He's in the midst of it with us. He's taking us to where He would want us to go in obedience as we follow Him. God knows what He has after for us. He's preparing a place for you and me. God is calling you. Somewhere to something. God is calling you. Are you listening? God knows where He's taking you. Will you be obedient and will you trust Him? Where God is taking you is eternal, as He is the builder. Would you pray with me? Lord Jesus, I pray that as we go out this week, we'll be paying close attention, acute attention to what You would call us to, what You would ask us to step out in faith, even if we don't know all the details. Lord, I pray that we will remember Abraham, that we'll remember Abel, that we'll remember Noah, that we'll remember Sarah, that we'll remember Rahab, that we'll remember all of those who have gone before us, and that we will choose to live as they did, as people of faith. It is the most precious gift that God has ever given. To have faith in His Son. Do you have it? And if you don't, it is for you. It's free. It's a gift that came at a tragic price. And to receive that gift, you are to simply believe that you are a sinner. And that Jesus came to this earth because He loved you and He desires to have relationship with you. And you would believe that He was crucified, that he died on a cross for you, and that he was buried, and that he rose again, and he lives today. He lives to walk with you on into eternity. And if you've never made that decision, I would encourage you to make it today. That you would take a step of faith and trust your life into the hands who made you. Jesus, we so love you. We ask that you would be with us as we walk, as we face the things that we face this week, that we would be reminded that you know exactly where we are, that you are with us, and that you will give us victory. In Jesus' most powerful name, we pray these things. And everybody said, amen and amen.